We would like to pause here to express our deepest respect to all survivors of oppression and hold space for the reality that many of these words can be activating for those who have lived experiences directly or indirectly with the topic at hand. The weight of such experiences is not lost on our group, and we want to remind you to pause and take time as you need it. Lastly, it is not the goal of our team to perpetuate rape culture and the stigma that men are the only perpetrators and other genders the only survivors. While we know that 1 in 6 men are sexually assaulted in their lifetime, the numbers are much more accessible to view the male perpetrator, as a vast majority of those who are assaulted are the victims of men.
So, what constitutes rape? Rape is a type of sexual assault involving sexual intercourse or other forms of sexual penetration that are carried out by against a person without their consent. It's important to mention that rape can happen to both women and men, and we'll explore that a little bit further in the presentation.
Prevalence of sexual assault. According to Smith, 1 in 5 women, an estimated 25.5 million, to be clear, that is the population of Portland, times 39, are survivors of completed or attempted sexual assault. Men disclose at a smaller scale. According to Whittam, they are still being assaulted at an astronomical rate of 1 in 6, experiencing that in their lifetime, and 55% of that experiencing it before the age of 17. While studies vary on what is defined as rape or sexual violence, one thing that they do not vary on is the reality that disproportionately marginalized populations are affected. 4 in 5 bisexual women are assaulted in their lifetime, and over 56% of bisexual men. 25% of queer men experience rape in their lifetime, whereas that number rests at 3% for heterosexual men. Sexuality and gender are not where this drastic difference stops. Other systems of oppression are at play as well. As Crenshaw has demonstrated through her massive research on intersectionality, the more of these areas that a person is involved in, the higher their chances of experiencing sexual violence in their lifetime. For example, race. Over 27% of Hispanic individuals, almost 34% of non Hispanic Black individuals, and over 29% of non Hispanic white heterosexual men experience some form of sexual violence. According to the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, the lifetime prevalence rates for rape are 9.5% of Asian or Pacific Islander women, 15% of Hispanic women, 19.9% of white women, 20.7% of Black women, 28.9% of American Indian or Alaskan Native women, 31.8% for multiracial women. Now consider for a moment the intersectionality of poverty. A total of 78.3% of homeless women in the study that had been subjected to rape, physical assault, and or stalking at some point in their lifetimes. 1/4 of respondents had experienced attempted or completed rape by an intimate partner. Not surprisingly, the greater amount of time a survivor had spent homeless directly correlated to the number of times they had been assaulted.
So, men as victims of rape, male rape is believed to be vastly underreported, with many men not disclosing their experiences due to fears of societal stigma, fear of being perceived as weak, or they have the belief that authorities won't take them seriously. There is not a lot of resources established for men as victims of rape. The system is kind of set up mostly for women. Um, but many men who experience rape as adults were also victims of sexual abuse in childhood. Studies show strong links between childhood sexual victimization and later experiences of sexual violence. Education and advocacy are crucial in combating the myths surrounding male rape, such as the false belief that men cannot be raped or that it's less serious when it happens to men. Raising awareness about male victimization is essential for reducing stigma and encouraging men to seek help. So, there was a study that indicated um, that there's a significant number of men who experience sexual violence, and it said that 1 in 6 will experience some form of sexual violence in their lifetime.
Supporting and reporting sexual assault. It's not always easy to know what to say when someone tells you they've been sexually assaulted, especially if they are a friend or a family member. For a survivor, disclosing to someone they care about can be very difficult, so it is encouraged to be as supportive and non judgmental as possible. Sometimes support means providing resources, such as how to reach the National Sexual Assault Hotline, seek medical attention, or report the crime to the police. But often listening is the best way to support a survivor. Many agencies like Futures Without Violence is a health and social justice nonprofit with a simple mission to heal those among us who are traumatized by violence today and to create healthy families and communities free of violence tomorrow. From domestic violence and child abuse to bullying and sexual assault, there are groundbreaking programs, policy development, and public action campaigns designed to prevent and end violence against women, men, and children around the world. Striving to reach new audiences and transform social norms, trained professionals such as doctors, nurses, judges, athletic coaches are all improving responses to violence and abuse. Many agencies to stop sexual assault and violence also work with advocates, policymakers, and others to build sustainable community leadership and educate people everywhere about the importance of respect and healthy relationships. In the state of Oregon, by definition, sexual assault is any type of sexual encounter without a person's consent, which includes rape, attempted rape, child molestation, inappropriate touching, incest, voyeurism, indecent exposure, and sexual harassment. As a citizen who cares, I can start by knowing my resources in case someone reports an assault to me.
Early interventions for sexual assault survivors. While the exact options for what your choices and rights are post sexual assault vary by location, there are some that are pretty universal in the United States. Sexual assault nurse exams, also called SANES, are a forensic method of collecting not only possible DNA evidence of a perpetrator, but also as an introduction to follow up advocacy services. Often, SANE nurses are specially trained and spend their career keeping up on evidence based practices for these exams, while partnering with local advocacy centers and law enforcement. It is during this process that survivors can access PrEP, which is a preemptive medication for those with potential exposures to HIV or AIDS, as well as pregnancy tests and preemptive medications for possible STD exposures and Plan B. They also are examined for other injuries and given follow up information for the local federally qualified health center if they do not have insurance. Regardless of insurance, however, the SANE exam is free thanks to the Violence Against Women Act. Side note, this is something that is coming up for funding this year, and I would encourage you to drop a line to your representatives. Should survivors choose to file a police report, the evidence from SANE exams is given to the police in a sealed box. Should the survivor choose not to report, the states vary on the amount of time that they will hold evidence. In Washington state, it is 99 years. Forensic interviewing is a part of the SANE exam. However, for children, it is an entirely separate event. While adults are able to be appropriate historians for the sequence of events, children have been led to answer things in ways that have not been as truthful. Forensic interviewing offers a safe, trauma informed lens where the children are given the opportunity to speak to one on one with a social worker instead of with police and other people in the room, often putting them in a situation where they are acutely aware of the displacement of power. The National Sexual Violence Resource Center has guidance on how to find local advocacy centers. These advocates are well trained in the specific laws and procedures of their communities. Advocacy is not based on time and is something that a survivor can reach out for even years after the assault.
So, are there factors that can predispose men to become rapists? Research has shown that there are some different factors, but it's important to mention that there is no single factor that can predict who's going to commit sexual violence. So, some of the patterns that research has revealed is that um, men who have experienced physical, emotional, or sexual abuse during childhood are more likely to exhibit aggressive sexual behavior later in life. When hypermasculinity and gender norms, um, when cultural beliefs that emphasize dominance and control and aggression as masculine traits, they can contribute to a higher likelihood of engaging in sexual violence. When a person holds misogynistic beliefs and view women as being inferior, um, they can have hostile attitudes towards women, and that could put them at a higher risk of committing rape. Having a lack of empathy, so having a lack of empathy toward women can contribute to a man's willingness to engage in sexual violence. Peer influence, so I'm thinking to things like fraternities or another group that might be like hyper masculine, and they condone, they may condone promoting sexual violence, and that could put them at an increased risk of participating in rape. Substance abuse. So, alcohol and drugs can lower inhibitions, impair judgment, make some men more likely to engage in sexual violence. There are psychological disorders that can come into play, like antisocial personality disorder. Those are linked to an increased likelihood of committing sexual violence. Repeated exposure to pornography, especially violent pornography, it might make a man think that it can encourage the beliefs that women actually enjoy being coerced or harmed during sexual activity. So that's a factor that can come into play. And if they have a history of deviant sexual behavior, men that participate in things like voyeurism, exhibitionism, sexual harassment, it might escalate to more violent forms of sexual aggression like rape over time. And then finally, many rapists are motivated not by sexual desire, but by a need to exert power and control over their victim.
Treatment for perpetrators. Unequivocally, there is greater success in disrupting the cycle of problematic sexual behaviors in children than in the reformation of adults. The adequate services to do this, however, are difficult to find. While most juvenile cases are based in reformative justice, there are no inpatient sexual abuser centers in the Pacific Northwest. The closest, and the one that most local children are sent to, is in Utah. It can be a difficult concept to sell, to support people who think about wanting to assault others and help them to avoid doing harm. For many, the fear of just admitting that they want help with these thoughts prevents them from seeking help. However, There are growing resources out there, such as Stop It Now, a group dedicated to such interventions. They offer a 24/7 phone line and chat services to support people in creating a safety plan to prevent them from harming others. They have recently introduced a similar line for adolescents, as 70% of teens who are assaulted by another teen.
What is sexual coercion? In a healthy relationship, both partners feel comfortable with the level of physical activity, whether that means holding hands, kissing, touching, and/or having intercourse. One aspect of your life that you can always have complete control over is how far you want to take it with your romantic partner, your significant other, your crush, or even someone you're just hooking up with. When it comes to anything physical, you absolutely have a voice and do not have to do anything you don't want to. Sexual coercion can involve verbal pressure or manipulation and can include repeated requests or feeling badgered into having sex, using guilt or shame to pressure someone. You would do it if you loved me, is an example. Threatening the loss of the relationship or infidelity if one does not engage in sex. Other forms of emotional blackmail. Threats to your children, home, or job. Threats to lie about or spread rumors about you. Coercion in marriage and relationships. Sexual coercion refers to any unwanted sexual activity that occurs after being pressured in non-physical ways. It is estimated that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 10 men have experienced sexual coercion, although the rates may be much higher as sexual coercion is still not well understood. Sexual coercion can occur in context of marital and dating relationships and is most likely to happen with someone with whom you already have a relationship. Feeling pressured to engage in sexual activities when you do not want to is sexual coercion. Like many things, there is a continuum. Milder forms of sexual coercion can feel uncomfortable or lead you to feel bad about the experience, whereas more severe forms can be traumatizing and lead to lasting consequences. Sexual coercion is often seen in the context of abusive relationships, and the perpetrator often engages in multiple forms of coercive control. According to Psychology Today, sexual coercion may not always be obvious, and thus education about what it looks and feels like and the harm it can cause are vital. Next, we must continue to enforce egalitarian gender norms so that women and men are viewed as equal partners in a relationship and foster open communication and dialogue around issues related to sex within the relationship. Finally, we must teach children and teens about consent and how to behave in egalitarian partnerships.
So, what is rape culture? Rape culture affects everyone by fostering an environment where sexual violence is more likely to occur, and it makes it harder for survivors to come forward due to the fear of being disbelieved or shamed. It also reinforces harmful stereotypes, contributing to the systematic oppression of women and other vulnerable groups. So there are some elements of rape culture. I think the biggest one is blaming the victim. And people can do that by saying things like they asked for it, or they dressed a certain way, um, and or behaved in a certain way, and those are really dangerous things to put on somebody. Also, viewing women as sexual objects rather than full autonomous individuals can contribute to attitudes of entitlement over women's bodies. A lack of understanding about what constitutes clear consent, or believing that silence or lack of resistance is consent. So it's really important to not diminish that consent element, because that can contribute to rape culture. Um, Finally, excusing and ignoring violent behavior. Um, I hear this one all the time also. Boys will be boys, or locker room talk. I think it's really important to educate and let people know that this is not okay. It's not appropriate. Um, so yeah, rape culture. It's something that I think that we all need to work toward and speak up and say something when something is not right. Um,
Early education on sexual coercion, rape, and consent. To support youth in navigating situations and relationships where sexual coercion and sexual assault occurs, it is essential that sexual and reproductive health programs address the topic of consent because it is a key element to preventing sexual coercion. Consent must be clearly and freely communicated without the influence of alcohol and drugs and with the understanding that it can be revoked at any time. It is as simple as yes or no. Tips for teaching youth consent in sexual and reproductive health programming. Establish a safe, non-judgmental space. Emphasize the value and characteristics of healthy relationships. Encourage self-reflection to help youth understand their desires and boundaries. Explore power dynamics. Engage in active and ongoing learning about youth culture to facilitate tailored and accessible conversations on consent. Incorporate learning about legal consequences for sexual assault and rape. Address intersectionality and inclusivity when discussing sexual coercion and consent. Involve families and other trusted adults in conversations about sexual coercion, sexual assault, and consent. According to Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, the term sexual violence is an all-encompassing, non-legal term that refers to crimes like sexual assault, rape, and sexual abuse. Sexual violence can take on many forms, anywhere from sexual harassment at work to sexual abuse or exploitation from people in positions of power.